5 verses. It takes Luke 5 verses to summarize the entirety of the problem of discipleship. The problem of discipleship. It's right there in black and white. Listen to Jesus' teaching. Could anything be easier? But what does your religion look like? Doesn't your religion look like Martha? Let's go home, shall we? Let's go all the way home to the time just before television, before retirement homes and nursing homes and palliative care facilities, to the veranda, the big, wide front porch which overlooks the back acreage, which is in full growth, but not quite ready for harvest. The corn and the beans are doing just fine. The sun is high and hot, and there's not much to be done except just sit with a tall glass of lemonade and literally watch the corn grow. On a farm, of course, there's always something that could be done. And some farmers feel compelled to get them done, and they'll call for the older children to come help, to fix a hinge on the barn door, to replace the fuel filter on the tractor, to put a new piece of corrugated tin on the roof of the other one pop loose, to walk the rows, searching for disease or critters. And raccoons can ruin an entire acre of corn in a single evening. To tie down, nail down, or otherwise harness anything that could fly loose during one of those magnificent pop-up thunderstorms. But none of that has to be done, especially now that Grandpa Jasper has come out onto the veranda to sit in his rocking chair and watch the corn grow. Grandpa Jasper, carrying a venerable Old English name, hearkening clear back to the Viking days, who sailed into England from Scandinavia, and then when the New World was still new, sailed across the Atlantic Ocean to settle once and for all far from any ocean. Grandpa Jasper carries that name, and even though he has no memory of the old country, for it is his grandpa's forebears who finally touched the golden shores of the New World, he carries the old country wherever he goes, in his speech, in his mannerisms, and especially in his stories. He also carries with him a tall glass of lemonade in one hand and a little brown jug in the other, a jug he'd acquired from his Uncle Joe from over the hill, Uncle Joe being 50 years younger than he is and not at all related, but because of the fine liquids he managed to produce from the various mashes of grains, all locally and organically grown, the whole region praised him with the name Uncle Joe. Grandpa Jasper sits down and pours a little bit from Uncle Joe's jug into the glass of lemonade. The liquid is crystal clear. And seeing as how Grandpa Jasper is nearly 90 years old, it's all right. This is his afternoon tonic to ease the aches and pains of an old man in the twilight of his long and happy years. He sets the glass of lemonade on the table to the side of his rocking chair there, and he sets the little brown jug on the floor to the other side of the rocking chair. Then he reaches into the front pocket of his coveralls, drawing from it his pipe and a packet of tobacco, another vice which gives him the greatest of pleasures. He bangs the pipe on the arm of his rocking chair and proceeds to pack it with tobacco, which gives off a pleasant enough aroma while it is unlit, but once it's lit, oh, the aroma changes to something harmonious with the world. Grandpa Jasper is getting nothing accomplished, is he? But he's old, right? We can leave him be on the veranda for a little while so that we can go help with the barn door or the tractor or the roof or the varmints or helping Mama get supper ready, or the multitude of chores which could be done and should be done. Otherwise, how are we going to survive? It's not good enough for Grandpa Jasper to sit quietly on the porch, exuding peace, over there, out of the way. No, he opens his mouth and he starts talking. He starts telling stories to anyone who might want to hear them, just sitting there talking, pausing to puff on his pipe and to take a sip of his afternoon tonic. "Oh, that's good," he says. Henry, one of the boys, stops by at the veranda and sits there, leaning up against his railing post, listening. Henry is old enough that mindless children's play doesn't hold his interest, but he's not old enough to manhandle any of those bigger chores, so it suits him just fine to listen to old Grandpa Jasper tell stories and wonder if any of them are true, while he lets his older brothers wrestle with a big barn door and argue with the fittings on a recalcitrant tractor. In this way, Henry hears the history of his whole family, how his forebears settled the land in the east and then moved south, and then were cut off from the old country by the American Revolution, and how they bought a hotel and built it into a fine post office and railway station, and then how, because they had slaves, they were entirely disenfranchised by the American Civil War, and how they had to move back north and then west, and how when Grandpa Jasper was a little boy and just had memories forming, and they were riding in a mule-drawn wagon, they crossed the wild Gooseberry Creek, a branch of the larger Muskogee River, up the bluffs and onto this little acreage, a patch of rolling, fertile soil which hadn't been farmed in who knows how long. And he tells them the story of how they helped build the church, how they brought in a pastor, how they built up a tradition at the old home place, holding hands, as it were, with the traditions they were building up around their church. But it was more than just historical information. Every once in a while, Grandpa Jasper would pause, asking Henry, "Now, what do you think about that?" And every once in a while, Henry would answer, before he learned better, "I don't know why we can't go back to living like it was in the old days, Grandpa." Grandpa Jasper answers, "No, Henry, you can't go back. I'm not telling you these stories just so you know what happened, son. I'm telling you these stories so that you know who you are. Do you know who you are?" Eventually, someone who has an aching shoulder from propping up the barn door, or someone who is just plain mad because the fuel filter won't come off the tractor, sees Henry leaning up against that post, and sweat and grime is in their eyes and all over their hands, and he's just as cool as Larry the Cucumber, heedless of all the deeds that have to be done. And they yell, "Grandpa Jasper!" And here we are, almost 2 pages into this sermon, single-spaced, and I'm finally getting to the first lesson. Do you know what I'm doing here? Are you following? Try to keep up, why don't you? I know it seems like a soft, easy sermon for a lazy summer Sunday morning, but I've already told you a million things. And here's the first lesson to go with those million things. It's Henry they're after, right? Well, then why are they yelling at Grandpa Jasper? Martha goes up to Jesus and she says, "Lord." Another lesson. There's the second lesson. She calls him Lord, do you know who you are? Do you know whose you are? Grandpa Jasper, don't you care that Henry isn't doing the work that needs to be getting done? They know there's a relationship between Grandpa Jasper and Henry. They can see it. It's right there, marked by the clouds of smoke enveloping the two of them. They know that if they yell at Henry, then they are breaking a sacred relationship created by Henry's venerable grandfather. Therefore, they yell at grandfather, "Don't you care?" He's sitting right in front of them, in plain view, a man who survived the American Civil War, is an immigrant, and a pioneer farmer, sitting there, a sign of peace and inner tranquility. And they hate it. He's already done the work for them. And for some reason, they can't settle down and listen to him teach them. A pastor friend of mine had a rather nice parish. It had its troubles, but on the whole, they liked him, and he got along with them just fine. The Ladies' Guild invited him to every meeting to do a Bible study with them, a full 20 minutes of Bible study once a month, on Thursday at about noon. After Bible study, they would serve lunch. It became a habit to get as much of lunch prepared as possible before noon so that they could sit down and listen to the Bible study. It was ideal, a perfect picture right out of this story, a picture of Mary and Martha, except that almost all the ladies played the part of Mary. And it was a happy, relaxed, fun time for them to sit down and listen and learn from their shepherd, their fully empowered representative from the Lord himself. Almost all of them. There was one lady in her mid-30s, a stay-at-home mother of 3, who was nice enough, except at Ladies' Guild meetings. For some reason, she could not stop serving during the Bible study, even though lunch was basically cold cuts of meat and cheese and bread slices already brought in a few trays from the grocery store, some coffee, which was percolating, and some juice in the fridge for those who preferred something sweet to drink. All that remained was the coffee cake to be sliced, something that could certainly wait until much later. But there she'd go, banging through the door of the kitchen, carrying something out, banging back in, rummaging through drawers and cabinets, banging back out again. This went on, meeting after meeting, for years, with the pastor occasionally saying to her, "You know, it's actually time for Bible study. Why don't you sit down with the rest of the ladies and relax and let me teach you?" "These things need to get done," she'd respond. In the end, at a difficult time in the history of that parish, she stood up in the church voters' meeting and accused the pastor of many misdeeds, most of which were inconsequential, even if they had been true, and that he was bipolar and unfit mentally for the ministry. Well, somehow that upset the whole apple cart. It was just the right thing at the wrong time, and his ministry there was destroyed, and he had to carry on somewhere else. What happened? "Martha, Martha," says Jesus, repeating her name. Without being told, you know exactly what Jesus is saying when he doubles up her name. You know exactly what that means. "Martha, Martha, you are anxious about many things." If I've seen it in one Christian home, I've seen it in a million Christian homes. If I've seen it in one parish, I've seen it in a million parishes. Pastors and congregations get themselves all wound up in a big tangled mess, anxious about the building fund, the youth program, the ladies' guild, the men's group, prayer circles, the praise band, the mission societies, council meetings, elders meetings, executive meetings, choir practices, and whatever auxiliary functions and special things you can imagine. And what gets neglected? What comes last? Bible studies, preaching, the Lord's Supper, all of which can be summed up as listening to Jesus tell stories. What does your religion look like? Mary? Or is it Martha? But if those things don't get taken care of, then there won't be a ministry. Martha, Martha, you are anxious about many things. That is to say, pastors and congregations can get all tangled up together instead of having a clear, direct thread, a straight line, as from Grandpa Jasper to Henry, from Jesus to Mary, and from pastor to you. When you have that ball of tangled mess finally disentangled, and a relationship of pastor to congregation that more resembles the relationship of Jesus to Mary, all these things will take care of themselves. All these things have already taken care of themselves, if you think about it. Who are you? You are a Christian, which has many things attached to it, which need an awful lot of teaching, as St. Paul says, to equip you for every good work. Whose are you? You belong to Jesus. When the Son of God goes to the cross to pay for your sins and the sins of the whole world, then all these things that you think must be or must get done, well, they'll get done without all the anxiety. As a parish, you're looking down the barrel of a whole lot of changes, and they will give you cause for anxiety and trouble. You have the good portion, my dear friends. You have Christ crucified teaching you. Christ crucified is the one thing necessary. Everything else is like butter.